Hello, Vincent Carroll speaking. Tutorial number 27, skin conditions. Skin conditions can be divided in two. They can be external or they can be internal. I find most people who come to acupuncture have internal skin conditions that manifest on the exterior through heat in the blood. But skin conditions can also be external. For example, damp. Damp can attach onto the skin. A lot of classic acne, for example, the type of painless acne that's more squeezy, that type of acne tends to be damp very often from the exterior, but not always. Of course, it can be internal damp as well, manifesting on the exterior, but a certain percentage of it will come from the exterior. But any sort of skin condition that manifests as damp that comes from the exterior, that damp will of course travel in and affect the spleen and undermine the spleen, and then you get damp in the interior. So very often damp coming from the exterior as a skin condition will eventually internalize by undermining the spleen, and then you have damp because of failed spleen, which of course is an interior condition, but one way or the other can manifest on the skin. So your question is it an exterior condition or is it an interior condition? And a lot depends on the length of time it's been there. I mean, if a person has years of acne on their face, for example, even though it might well have started as an exterior condition, by this stage it almost certainly is interior failure of spleen. So you look for other evidence for the spleen failing. But most people who come to me anyway have heat, because heat creates pain, and pain is a good motivator to bring anybody from a treatment point of view. So I suppose when the spleen, when heat enters into the blood, heat in the blood is one of the major reasons for one having skin conditions. Very often the typical urticarial rash, for example the histamine sort of reaction that many people have, is viewed from an acupuncture point of view as heat in the blood. So for example, if an antibody-antigen reaction occurs, so the person eats something or breathes in something or contacts themselves with something that they're allergic to, that will damage the mast cells in the human body. Mast cells are white blood cells that contain histamine, by forming an antigen clump, if you like, that sits on the surface of the mast cell, rupturing it and allowing the spilling of histamine. And of course that's why people take antihistamines, because if a person has histamine, very often it can affect the skin with red, irritable, sudden onset blotchy bumps, or quite high bumps as well that can occur, leading to a person to scratch. And of course the more they scratch, the more they want to scratch, because the more histamine is released. So therefore people take antihistamines. That's a classic example of heat in the blood. So heat in the blood is a major reason for skin conditions on the interior. So the treatment for that is to do spleen 10, because spleen 10 cools blood. The basic treatment principle is to cool blood. By cooling blood, you take heat out of the blood and you pull the rug from under this very intense reaction that can occur. So for example, in needling spleen 10, it is essential you get a very strong reaction. Spleen 10 as a point can vary a little bit. It's around the vastus medialis point, just superior to the knee on the medial surface. You have to find it, and that might take a little bit of poking around to actually get it, but you have to get an absolute connection, an intense bullseye when you needle spleen 10 to release heat in the blood. And generally the whole area blotches up around the needle, it reddens up. I'm inclined to do it bilaterally, because usually when somebody comes to you with heat in the blood manifesting as a skin rash, then in that case very often what happens is there's too much traffic for one needle, too much chi, too much heat is escaping up one needle, so you need to do it bilaterally. And equally, when you do it bilaterally, that also can be a very, very strong point as well. But these are the points that I would be inclined to do for an emergency treatment for heat in the blood, which manifests in an emergency way, if you like, on the skin as extensive heat, urticarial type hives or rashes. And in my own practice, that's the commonest reason why people come. Now, other things can happen as well. A person can be set up, a person's skin, if you like, can be set up to fail. And we're talking about maybe a lung deficiency. Lung and skin are associated with each other. So, for example, a person might have a history of, for want of a better word, poor skin quality. And that can result in poor lung yin. So consider tonifying lung 9 to tonify up the lung. But very often you need a trigger as well. So not only might you have, say, skin set up to fail by having a deficiency maybe of lung, leading to poor quality skin. One may also have needs an external trigger, and that external trigger could be dietary, it could be the climate, it could be a range of other things, it could be mental, emotional. I mean, that's why people blush, for example, in the sense that it is mental, emotionally triggered heat manifesting on the skin. And of course, the skin is the largest cooling surface in the body, so that's where it goes, and one cools down. You're perfectly normal, that's physiology. But it becomes pathology if there's heat in the blood. Excuse me. And if there's heat in the blood, what happens is the heat manifests on the skin, and it's more likely to manifest at times if a person's skin quality is very poor. I had a person, I always remember this particular case, that came to see me, a lovely young man, and he was training to be an electrician, and he had a lot of skin conditions due probably to a lung deficiency, and it was holding him back socially because he had a lot of flakiness and poor quality skin, but it came out as scratchy, itchy rashes every now and again. So I couldn't find a trigger for what was causing it, and I searched and I asked all the right questions. I thought I asked all the right questions, and I didn't get anywhere because his life seemed very, very bland. No, he didn't have hot spices, he didn't sort of lie in the sun, he didn't drink alcohol or anything that would put a lot of heat into the body. He led a very modest, abstemious type of lifestyle because he himself was trying to subtract things that he thought might cause his skin, because he suspected, as I suspected, there was some trigger that we just weren't hitting on, that we just weren't finding why he had this flaky, poor quality skin that was very itchy, he was tearing himself. It was quite bad. It was over other parts of his body, but it was all his upper body, because of course heat rises. Until a student in my class said, "What do you have for breakfast?" And I already asked that question, and he said porridge, and I dismissed that because what could be more harmless than taking porridge? But my clever student said, "But what do you put in the porridge?" And he said cinnamon. When he withdrew cinnamon from his porridge, his skin condition completely improved. The skin quality was still quite poor, so it still required tonification of lung 9, but the actual heat, the acceleration that he was taking with his porridge was removed, and that deaccelerated heat going onto the skin. So therefore, what I'm really saying is, you never know. Cover all your options, ask in detail, ask thoroughly, because very often there is a trigger which tips you over the edge. A lot of people with their skin exists on a knife edge, and if they're lucky they'll never find out what puts them over that knife edge. But very often it can be something. It can be a mental emotional sort of heat rising from the liver. It can be an external heat entering into the body, maybe the climate, maybe sunshine, maybe sunbathing too much, or of course it can be dietary as well entering in. So very often there can be a trigger that causes heat in the body. And if you have a predisposition to perhaps heat manifesting on the skin, it'll more likely manifest on your skin than somebody else's skin. But equally, if a person does take what from a Western medical point of view would be described as an allergen, something that they are allergic to, then in that case that will present straightforward heat in the blood, and you're talking about spleen 10, taking the heat out as rapidly as you can. Drag it down as well, why not? Stomach 20, stomach 44, gallbladder 43, but for the most part we're talking about spleen 10 bilaterally. Thank you.